Hello friends, welcome back to the channel, or if you are new here, welcome. As the seasons are changing and we are winding down, getting closer to winter, our rhythm in the kitchen also kind of switches over too. One thing that always remains the same though in my kitchen is I'm always trying to stick with simple yet delicious meals for my family. And today I wanted to share with you what a typical day in my kitchen looks like this time of year. I don't always wake up before the sun rises, but there are times during the week that I do, specifically when I'm trying to get ahead on a certain meal. So this morning I am up early so I can have plenty of time to allow my croissants to rise. This is a new recipe for me and I'll put it down below in the description box if you want to try it out yourself. It turned out fabulous the very first time, so I'm pretty excited about it. But these are called orange glaze rolls. They are pretty spot on for the Pillsbury crescent rolls. So if you like those, these are pretty much the same thing. And if you're wanting just the normal ones, you would leave out the sugar and the orange options. But I wanted to do these because I thought it would be a little bit different of a twist. So I am adding orange zest to the dough, and then I'll add an orange glaze to go over top of them when they're all finished. Typically throughout the week, I will have only a couple of days where I wake up super early and I try to make a breakfast that will kind of last a couple of days. So then I'm not getting up every single day and making a breakfast from scratch every single day. So earlier this week, I did a breakfast casserole and that lasted a couple of days. Today I am making these orange rolls and they'll last a couple of days unless people end up eating them for like snacks or dessert. But I typically try to do this a couple times a week where I'll make a larger batch of something. I'll also, over the weekend, I'll do like pancakes or waffles and I will make a huge batch of it and then we will be able to have it throughout the week. And then of course we also have oatmeal and yogurt and granola on those mornings where we don't have any of these meals left over, but we want to have a quick go-to breakfast. Those are usually what we go to. So I am rolling out the dough now that I have it all put together, and I'm adding in flour when it's necessary if it's overly sticky, but I'm kneading it and it's said to do that for about 5 minutes. So I did do that before I put it back into a greased bowl and then covered it for about an hour until it doubled in size. As you can see, I still have my dried oranges that I made. I believe it was in my last video, but I have my dried oranges still. I have not put them up because I have yet to actually decorate my kitchen. I put up our tree and I decorated the living room in my last video. The kids also, they decorated, since then they've decorated their tree and it looks beautiful, but we have not done any more decorating. I plan on getting to that this weekend. So if you're interested in seeing any more of our Christmas decorations going up, you'll be able to check that out in next week's videos. The dough is now done with its first rise, so I'm punching it down, getting out the air bubbles, and I'm going to turn it out onto a floured surface. I'll roll it out into a 12-ish inch round circle, and then I'll cut it and roll them. So I had someone recently ask about how I help dough rise when you have a very cold kitchen, and that is actually something that I deal with pretty often. Our kitchen is very, very cold in the wintertime, and now it's even cold now that it's, fall and the temperatures have dropped. A couple of things that I do for that are I basically will put the dough next to something that is very warm. So if we have the fire going, I will put it next to the fire. I always have it covered so I don't have to worry about any debris or anything like that. So usually I will put it next to the fire if we have that going. You want to make sure that it's not too close. I also like to rotate it every now and then, and that helps so it is more even. If I have stuff going on the stove, I'll put the bowl with the towel over top of it on the stove. Another thing I recently started doing is while I'm putting the dough together, I will preheat the oven to a very low temperature, about 200 degrees, and then I will turn it off once it gets to that point, let it cool down just slightly before I put the dough into the oven. I never put it into a hot oven, it is just kind of warm, and then that helps rise. So I do that. I actually did that for this dough, and it took about an hour and a half for the dough to double in size. So for these, once the dough was done rising, I divided it into 2 dough balls, and then I rolled the one out into about a 12-inch-ish circle. And then I brushed it with some melted butter, and I am putting on the sugar. So down below, if you look at the recipe, it says a ton of sugar, and I did not do that. I put a very thick coating on, as you can see, but I did not do the amount that it said on there because I just felt like that was way too much. And I actually like the amount of sweetness. It was not overpowering when these were done, and the orange was not overpowering either. I really loved how you could definitely taste it, but it was subtle. So I'm glad I did not do as much sugar as it said. So now I'm just dividing the dough, and it said into 12 triangles. However, I felt like it was leaving them a little too big. So I ended up cutting them, and I'm like sitting here trying to count. But I ended up making all of this particular dough ball very small ones, and that worked out pretty well because my kids, if they just wanted to try them, they would have a smaller one, and then if they were wanting more, then they would just have like 2. So it worked out with them being small. And then the next one, I'll end up kind of doing a mixture. I'll do a couple large ones and a couple small ones, but primarily the kids were grabbing for the smaller ones. So you'll just roll them out how you do a crescent roll from one of those containers, and they just roll up. And then you do want to, when you're putting it on the greased pan for its second rise, you want to make sure that the little skinny part of the triangle is actually face down. Mine kind of wiggled around, and I think just as it was rising, it wasn't fully under the crescent rolls, so they got a little messed up and I had to fix them, but it helps hold them together if you have it face down. So I'm laying them all on this greased pan and making sure that the point is face down, and then I'm going to cover them and put them in a warm spot for a second rise. This took about an hour, and during that time then I went ahead and made myself breakfast, and then I also made the orange glaze to go over top. I'm moving on to doing the second dough ball, and it's basically the same process. The only difference is I just altered the sizes a little bit. I wasn't sure how big they were going to rise, and I also wasn't sure, what my kids would really prefer. So I altered the sizes a little bit. Some will be larger and some will be smaller, but that's the only difference between the two batches. If this recipe looks a little tedious, it is just because, one, it's the first time I'm doing it, so I'm trying to figure it out for my family, but also this is really not that tedious. I think the biggest part of this whole recipe was actually having the dough rise. Other than that, it was a really, really simple recipe, and it came together pretty quickly. So other than me just trying to figure out what I'm doing here and what I'm trying to do that's best for my family, and then also having the dough rise 2 different times, that really was the biggest portion of this entire recipe. So I do highly recommend it. I was also super excited once I got this done because it turned out exactly how I was hoping it would. It is light and fluffy, just like the Pillsbury crescent rolls, and I was super excited to be able to now make them at home. So I'm going to, again, put these onto a greased pan, and then I'll let them do a second rise with the other batch. And while those are rising, I'm going to start breakfast for myself. If you have been here a while, you know that I don't always eat the same thing that my family does. I try to be a little bit healthier for things for health reasons. So I have been eating what I call veggie eggs. This is basically just like scrambled eggs that I put whatever vegetables that I have on hand. I just put those inside, and I will season them with like some of the Dash seasoning, some pepper, and that's pretty much it. I like to keep mine pretty simple, but you can add in whatever you want. While the veggies are cooking, I am going to get a pot of stock going. We made a ham earlier this week, and I have had the bones. I saved the bones and some of chunks of ham and stuff like that. So I'm wanting to start a pot of bone broth, get that going so I can save that for other recipes. I would say that I usually have some type of broth going throughout the week, especially in these colder months. It helps with heating up my kitchen, for one, but two, my family really enjoys it. I love having broth on hand to use for recipes throughout the week, and my kids actually really love drinking warm broth. So that is something that they'll often have for lunch, and it is just something that I usually will always have going throughout the week on the stove. For these veggie eggs, all I have going are some onions, and then I diced up about half of a red pepper. I'm going to add in some mushrooms that I cut up, and then I'll add in the eggs. Like I said, I like to keep this very simple, and this is actually the mixture that I originally started with. So I started eating these veggie eggs. I don't know if they were referred to as like omelets. I don't ever add cheese to them, but I started eating these when I was in the hospital with one of my kids. My last few pregnancies that I've had pretty difficult pregnancies, and so I've had a couple of hospital stays, and this was one thing that I always ordered for breakfast. It was on their healthier menu, and so it made me feel good about eating this, and it just keeps you fuller for longer. It is something that also stores really well in the fridge, so I try to make extra so I can put it in the fridge and then have it for like the next day. So this is something I always go to when I am trying to watch what I'm eating, and it always helps keeping me full until lunchtime. So here is how it turned out. Just some very simple eggs. Like I said, I used a little bit of pepper and Dash seasoning, and I ate it with a slice of pumpernickel bread. I don't know if it's just me, but I love pumpernickel bread, but I really love it when it's like extra toasted, like not black, but like really crunchy. So anyway, that is what I had for breakfast, and then I put some aside for the next day as well. And I don't know if you can hear, but while I'm doing this voiceover, I just noticed it. There is a bunch of birds that like huge, like crows, right outside of my office that I'm recording this. And I don't know if you can hear them, but they are really, really loud. And I would not doubt if you can hear a bunch of birds in the background. So if you can, I do apologize. But anyway, I have now started on the orange glaze to go over top of the orange rolls. So I'm heating all the ingredients up on the stove to get it nice and melted, and then I'm going to let it simmer for a couple of minutes to kind of thicken up before I put it on the rolls. As you can see, they are all done baking. It took hardly any time at all once they were done with their rise, and I'm going to put the orange glaze on. Before I put the glaze on, we actually did try a couple with just a little bit of melted butter over top, and these were so good how they were. The orange glaze definitely adds a nice little touch of orange, but they were delicious without it too. With all the family events we have coming up, we do like a baking day, we have Thanksgiving, all kinds of things coming up. I'm actually considering adding these to the list to bring to one of those events. Okay, so now we are going to start with lunch. We have breakfast out of the way for everybody, and we have leftovers for later on in the week. But now I need to start on some lunch, and I'm going to do just something very, very simple. This is something that I like to start kind of before we start our school stuff, so then I can have this going and slow roasting in the oven for a couple of hours. So I'm just getting some chicken leg and thigh quarters. In the cast iron, I put a little bit of oil, salt, pepper. I usually will like to put a sprinkle of garlic or some type of seasoning on there as well. And then I'm going to let it roast while we work on some school stuff, just low and slow. And sometimes I don't always have an idea of what I'm going to do with this, but in that amount of time, I usually can figure out what I want to do. So I like having these. I buy that big bag at Walmart, and it is, I believe, $7 for the whole bag, and it makes plenty of meals for our family. So I can really make it stretch, and that is why I end up doing that big bag. I jumped ahead and now the chicken is done. We ended up deciding on just some really simple wraps or quesadillas, so I'm going to make those. I waited for the chicken to cool down a little bit, and then I deboned it, and I just made some really simple quesadillas. Now this bag, I keep all the bones in. I have a couple of these bags to where anytime I am making chicken or like the ham or anything like that where it has bones, I'll keep them in a baggie in the freezer. I also keep all the scraps from my veggies, and I'll put those in the freezer. And then once I have a full bag, I'll then make broth. On mornings where I am usually making a big breakfast is usually the afternoons that where I do not make big lunches. So I like this kind of lunch because quesadillas are super easy. They're very filling. I'll serve them usually with like some kind of fruit. Today I served them with some sliced apples, but the chicken itself, it takes just minutes, if that, to put into the cast iron and get it cooking. And then, like I said, you can kind of figure out some type of lunch with that while it's cooking. I like to do like chicken salad. I like to do salads with chicken over top. It just kind of depends, but it is a super easy lunch. It's just kind of when you have the time and you don't want to dedicate it all that time in the kitchen, but it kind of cooks itself and it's very quick and easy. So I like having something like that usually going, and I do a lot of that when the weather is cooler. It helps heat my kitchen, and it's just something that where we have the time while we're doing other things. Here's our quick and easy lunch. Lincoln ended up wanting a chicken wrap, and the other two boys wanted chicken quesadillas. So they had that, some sliced apples. Aubrey ended up having some leftovers with chicken. So it was a very simple but really delicious lunch. I am jumping ahead again. We are done with school and it is in the evening, so I'm going to start on dinner. I am starting these diced potatoes a little earlier because I like they will cook quick if you need them to, but I feel like the flavors really develop nicely if you cook it a little longer, like low and slow. So I don't know if I'm sure I've made these on my channel before. I like making them when we have big get-togethers. They are usually a huge hit and it makes a lot of them. So I am making, we always just call them garlic potatoes. I'm dicing up potatoes and I try to keep it somewhat uniform, but I'm not perfect about it either. So I'm dicing them up and then putting them into this casserole dish. Then I will dice up some butter and I'll put that in, and then a lot of garlic. It's funny because my husband, he likes the taste of garlic, but since I met him, he's one of those people, like he's like this with onions too, where he is worried about smelling like them. So he doesn't like dishes that are overwhelmingly like garlic or onions. And he came in from work and you can smell this like outside as you're pulling up. It does smell like there is a ton of garlic, but I promise you it is not overpowering. It's going to seem like I'm putting in so much garlic, but really it's not. It is a lot, but it's just, I don't know, it works out well and it's not overpowering, I promise. So if you're one of those people and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to smell like garlic, or, if you're like my husband who immediately was like, oh, that smells like garlic, I promise you it is not that bad. So just trust the process on this one. I am using powdered garlic for these, but if you have like minced garlic, you could definitely add that too. Like I said, it is a couple tablespoons. I want to say it's like 1.5 to 2 tablespoons. It's a decent amount of garlic, but this is a good amount of potatoes, and like I said, it works out well. So garlic, salt, pepper, you mix it up really well, and then I am going to be putting a thing of foil on top just to make sure that it cooks down really well. But then once they are pretty soft, I will take the foil off and cook it a little longer to get some of those edges a little crispier. Not all of them, but it is really nice to brown some of them. It adds a really nice touch. So that is what I'm going to be doing. And like I said, you kind of just go off of texture. I never have a specific amount of time that I cook these. I cook them usually at 350 and for a couple of hours. It speeds up the process though to add the foil over top at first and then take it off. While those are in the oven, I'm going to be starting on the chicken, and I'm going to be doing a copycat version of Texas Roadhouse smothered chicken. It turned out incredible, so I do highly suggest this, and I'll put the recipe down below in the description box also. This is another thing that I like to do if you are new to my channel. I like to buy those packages of boneless, skinless chicken breasts, and then I will cut them in half, and I find that about 3 of them feeds my family for one meal. So I'll cut them in half because they're usually too big anyway, and then 3, it will make 6 of them, and that is the perfect amount for my family of 6. Usually it will allow some leftovers for my husband as well. So then I can reserve the other portion of the package of chicken for another meal. So I cut the chicken in half to make them thinner pieces. I seasoned both sides with the seasonings listed below, and then I'm putting them into cast iron pans to cook them partially. They are going to cook the rest of the way in the oven, so you do not have to worry about cooking them through at this portion. It is just pretty much about browning them. So once I did that, I put them off to the side, and I'm going to use that same skillet to cook the veggies in and make a gravy. All of these layers really add depth to the meal. So I am sauteing one onion that I diced up in the pan. And I do add in some mushrooms, but I only had 2 mushrooms left after I had made my veggie eggs and everything else I used them with. So I think it says 8 ounces of mushrooms, but I only had 2 mushrooms, not 2 ounces, 2 mushrooms. So I just diced those up, and it actually ended up turning out just fine. My kids, not all of them are a fan of mushrooms. I would say half are and half aren't. So 2 ended up working out just fine. I'm cooking those down, and I seasoned them with a little bit of Dash seasoning. It said to season them with salt and pepper. I just did a little bit of Dash, mixed it up, and then I'm going to take those out and set them aside. Now in the same skillet, I put in 4 tablespoons of butter, and then I'm going to do 4 tablespoons of flour. I'm going to mix that together and create kind of a roux to get it to thicken up and make a gravy. Once you get that thickened up, then you're going to slowly add in some beef broth. So I was doing it just a little bit at a time, maybe 1/4 cup. It was just a splash at a time, and I would give it a really good mix, and then I would add in a little bit more. So it's 2 cups of beef broth in total, and like I said, just slowly adding it in and developing that gravy as you're constantly stirring it. Then after that, I believe it is optional. They have in the recipe, I believe it's 1/4 cup of heavy cream, and I don't usually have that, but I did this time. So I added in just a splash, about 1/4 cup of heavy cream, and that just makes the gravy a little bit creamier, but I believe it is optional if you're not wanting to do that. So once you get the gravy to a consistency that you're wanting, it's nice and smooth. I then, because I had 2 cast irons, I had some of the chicken just in that cast iron. So I took half the gravy and I poured it into the chicken in this cast iron, and then I topped it with the veggies that we sauteed earlier. So, and then I'll just pop that into the oven and let it cook for a little bit. And then I'm going to, in the cast iron with the gravy, I'll add back in the chicken that I took out, top with the rest of the veggies, and then I'll put that one also in the oven. This recipe also has the option of adding cheese to the top of these and then melting that over top in the oven. Usually I probably would opt out of that. My kids aren't huge like into cheese. I don't know, it's a little odd, but so however, I wanted to kind of stick to the recipe from the restaurant, so I did give it a try. Now the restaurant uses Colby Jack. I did not have that, so I just used cheddar over the top. But what I did was I cooked them like this this in the oven. And then right before they were finished, I took them out. I checked the internal temperature to make sure that they were just about done. And then right before they were finished, I topped them with cheese and I put that in to cook the rest of the way. And then I did also broil it the last few minutes just to get that nice bubbly effect of the cheese. This dinner ended up being a huge hit and something that I am going to add to our weekly rotation. My kids absolutely loved it, and everybody really, really loved it. It was a really good meal to have, and especially on these nice, cool evenings, it was something that kind of gives you that homey meal effect. I love doing these potatoes when you have a bunch of other things that kind of need a little bit more attention, like the chicken we made tonight. These are definitely a put together and then forget about it type of dish, so I really love those. But this is how dinner turned out. We had the potatoes, the chicken, and I steamed some green beans on the side. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me for another Cook With Me video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!